Guys, this is Autumn with the weekly video lesson highlight. We're going to take a few moments to look at the passage that we're teaching this coming Sunday, February 11th, in our Fellowship Kids classes. All month long during February, the theme of our lessons is wow. We don't tend to lean too heavily on the theme of the curriculum for the month. We instead prefer to lean into the scripture passage and the story and allow that to guide and shape our time in class with our kids. This month, though, I love the theme. It's about God's power and specifically about how Jesus demonstrated that power through the miracles that he performed. And this week we're in Luke 8, verses 22 through 25. The story is about Jesus and his disciples crossing the Sea of Galilee. It's also called the lake. A storm comes up. The disciples are worried. They're scared for their lives. And they wake Jesus, and he speaks to the wind and the waves. They calm. They listen to his authority. And then the disciples marvel and say, "Who is this?" And they wonder at Jesus' great authority. This is a fun story to teach to our kids because we can engage it in a number of ways. Visual aids for this story are a great resource. You could use pictures of Galilee or the Sea of Galilee. You can engage it in sensory ways that spark the imagination, talking about the waves crashing and the fear that the disciples felt. This story is also told in many of our kids' Bibles or in book form. So The Storm That Stopped is a book we have on hand at South Broadway that tells the story that's recounted in this passage. The Beginner's Gospel Story Bible is on hand at both North Metro and South Broadway. This is a great resource for toddler and preschool age students. And this story is also included in the Jesus Storybook Bible, which is really good for kindergarten and older. It could also be used in our 4s and 5s class. Sometimes reading these stories as written for children helps us think through them, but these are also great resources to use in your classrooms. So now let's look at the passage together and contemplate some concepts that are in the passage. We want to ask God now to do a renewing work in our heart as we read his word and think about what we're teaching to our kids on Sunday. Here's the pattern that the gospel writers lay out for us, particularly in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and in this section of Luke. So Jesus, in these passages during his earthly ministry, talks about his kingdom. He teaches the people what his kingdom is like and the nature of the covenant people who are in his kingdom. And then he demonstrates to them through his miracles what his kingdom is like. So he's teaching and then he's showing. In some of the miracles that we'll discuss this month, like his healing miracles, Jesus is demonstrating that in his kingdom, there is no disease or death. So in Jesus' presence, under the authority of his power, disease and death cannot have dominion. In this story that we're telling this week, when Jesus calms the winds and waves, he just demonstrates his power over nature, but he also shows us that in his kingdom, disorder and chaos cannot reign. In another miracle that we'll look at together with our kids this month, the feeding of the 5,000, Jesus shows us that in his kingdom, there is no lack, no scarcity. Everyone has enough food. Everyone has enough love. So Jesus talks about the kingdom, then he shows us what his kingdom is like. He taught the people what his kingdom people were like, and then he showed them that in a place in which his will is fully done, his authority is fully executed, death cannot reign, disorder cannot reign, hunger and lack cannot reign. That he has power and dominion over all of those things. One other specific note about this passage, when Jesus shows his power over creation and over the wind and the waves, Sally Lloyd-Jones includes this beautiful line in the account in the Jesus Storybook Bible. The wind and the waves recognized Jesus' voice. They had heard it before, of course. It was the same voice that made them in the very beginning. They listened to Jesus and they did what he said. The theological tie that runs through all of these passages and all of these miracles is the understanding of Jesus' deity. He was demonstrating that he was God and he had full authority over creation. This same theological concept is shown to us in many Psalms. So Psalm 24, 29, 33, 65, I could go on, all talk about God's power, both in the creative act and then over the realm of creation. Psalm 33, 6 and 7 are just one passage that demonstrates this. By the word of the Lord, the heavens were made, their starry host by the breath of his mouth. He gathers the waters of the sea into jars. He puts the deep into storehouses. So in the mind of the disciples and in our minds, we are supposed to think, in these Old Testament passages, who has the power over creation? God does. Jesus is demonstrating that same power. So now who has power over creation in this scenario to calm the wind and the waves? Well, Jesus does, because Jesus is God. The theological concept that runs through these is Jesus is God. So we're supposed to think Jesus has the power to command creation, and in Jesus' presence, disorder, chaos cannot reign. Therefore, Jesus had the power to calm the dark, chaotic, stormy waters to save his disciples. Jesus has the power to calm the dark, stormy, chaotic waters inside of us as well. Therefore, that leads us to our big idea. Jesus has the power to calm our fears.